A win-win partnership. That's how Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu described his country's policy towards Africa during a regional security summit in the Senegalese capital. Dubbed the Dakar Forum, the annual gathering is taking on more importance this year in the wake of Russia's attack on Ukraine, especially its impact on global food and energy prices. Senegal was the first stop of Foreign Minister Cavusoglu's three-nation Africa tour. On Wednesday, Cavusoglu visited Ghana, where he called the West African country an important partner for Türkiye in the region. He also reiterated that Türkiye was a strategic partner for the African Union, noting that trade with the continent had passed $34.5 billion last year. Cavusoglu praised Ghana for championing the role of Africa in the UN Security Council. So what exactly is Türkiye's win-win approach to Africa, and how will Ankara differentiate itself from other established powers that have courted the continent? And for more on Türkiye's policy towards Africa and the continent's security challenges, I'm joined by Paul Simon Handy. He is a senior advisor at the Institute for Security Studies, regional offices in Dakar and Addis Ababa, and Kabir Adamo. He is the managing director of Beacon Consulting, which provides risk and security management solutions in Nigeria and the Sahel. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Paul, Turkish Foreign Minister said Ankara is strongly supporting Africa's 2063 vision plan. What exactly is this?
The Agenda 2063 is an AU program aspiration to see that actually underlines Africa's development path for up to the horizon of 2063 on all aspects of political, economic, and social life. It outlines Africa's long-term vision. So it's a vision. It's not really a policy, but that's the basis under which Africa would like to drive its relationships with partners across the globe.
So, Kabir, could you talk to us about the nature of Türkiye-Africa relations? I mean, how is Türkiye's West Africa policy shaped? Which factors were effective in expanding its political, economic, and military ties with the region?
Okay, I would be specific to Nigeria. So just to give you an example, recently, on the basis of the Nigerian security requirement, especially with regards to its campaign against terrorism, it reached out to Turkey and, as far as I'm aware, did purchase some hardware, including, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. And that's the kind of relationship. In the past, it was difficult for Nigeria to obtain some components of its military requirement. But Turkey has provided not just an option, but in terms of its strategic overview and as well as support vis-a-vis its relationship with the rest of the world. That is what is playing out also across some other countries in the continent.
So, Paul, what are your thoughts on Turkey's rising influence in those sectors?
I think Turkey's influence in Africa in the last 20 years has massively increased. From a diplomatic point of view, Turkey's number of embassies has literally skyrocketed. Turkey's investment in Africa have doubled, tripled in various parts of the continent. I'm sitting now in Addis Ababa, and the Horn of Africa is one of the strategic locations in which Turkey's investment in all aspects, economic, political, but also increasingly even in the security area, have been rising and literally becoming one of the main actors, global actors actually looking for influence in Africa. So Turkey in Africa, Turkey's footprint in Africa is definitely increasing massively.
It's increasing, but on the other hand, Kabir, what are the challenges facing Turkey's Africa policy? I mean, how can it differentiate itself from other established powers that have courted the continent for decades?
In the case of Nigeria, as an example, there are some peculiar issues that are, I would say, affecting the growth of that relationship. So the coup that happened in Turkey a couple of years ago, and the fact that the alleged leader of that coup has some investment in Nigeria, and we're aware that the Turkish government has attempted to get the Nigerian government to, as it were, stamp down or support its stance on that view. But to an extent, the Nigerian government has an opposing view. So that is kind of playing out. And going forward, I guess one of the things that would help the growth of Turkish diplomatic relationship with African countries is understanding that the interests can be shared, and then focusing on those shared interests and not necessarily the differences, especially separating political issues, internal political matters, and then the desire for shared interest along several areas such as agriculture, climate change, that both countries, frankly, and then of course counterterrorism.
So, could you talk to us about these, most of the African nations, let's say, they have not openly opposed Russia's attack on Ukraine. What's at stake for them?
Yeah, the African countries' reaction to the war in Iraq has been, let's say, rather difficult to read. We have seen a reluctance to openly condemn Russia, even though African countries do not condone, do not accept, do not encourage warmongering and war making. But African countries have considered this war in Ukraine at a broader confrontation between Russia and Western countries, in which many of the countries in Africa did not want to be involved in. So that probably explains why many countries either did not want to vote at the UN General Assembly or abstained. But by doing that, we've seen that the reaction of particularly Western countries has been rather strong in saying that Africa is reneging on its own principles of the territorial integrity of all countries, because according to what is happening, Russia has actually violated the territorial integrity of the Ukraine. And for that, many Western countries were accusing Africa for not upholding to its own principles of territorial integrity, the principles upheld actually by the African Union.
So, Kabir, how is this ongoing conflict in Ukraine affecting the general security situation across the continent?
So the consequences are aggravating the root causes of conflict within Africa. So the effect on the supply chain for products such as petroleum products, as an example, then food items, even medicine, name them. Most African countries are feeling the effect and the consequences of that disruption to the global supply chain of these items. Aid is also being affected. Most of the big donors, especially the European ones, have kind of diverted their funding to Ukraine and other parts of the world, but not necessarily Africa. So that has also created gaps. If we look at the Horn of Africa, if we look at even Nigeria, and then, of course, even to an extent, some of the conflicts that are affecting the Middle East, they are all suffering from either this donor fatigue or diversion of donor funds to Ukraine. So further expanding the root causes of conflict within this region, the developmental challenges, the poverty, and then name them. And then for Nigeria, there is, and not just for Nigeria, I'm hearing the same thing in several other countries. There is a local balance that we call JAPA. It's a term for migration.
Yes.
So a lot of skill sets that are needed to support the developing economy are now migrating to other parts of the world, mainly because of these aggravated circumstances that exist in African continent. So the long run effect, unfortunately, is a cyclical nature of this underdevelopment. that is affecting not just African countries, but the other.
Yes. So, Paul, Turkey had brokered the grain deal with Russia a few months ago. But in the meantime, West Africa is now facing its worst food crisis in 10 years, with over 27 million people already suffering from hunger. So do African countries have any plans to stave off this crisis, and whose collaboration they need it the most now?
I think they need a collaboration of everyone, because the wheat crisis actually affects everyone. And of course, it will affect weaker, poorer countries even more, and creating the grounds actually for eventually violent conflicts in some countries. But this crisis has also clearly demonstrated that many African countries remain extremely wheat dependent, whereas the wheat consumption it has demonstrated that African countries have not exhausted their internal capacity to actually produce bread out of their own internal products that have actually never been exploited. So somehow this crisis might also be a shake-up to indicate to many African countries that there's a potential internal market that they've never really exploited, and that could actually deter future shocks, particularly when supply chains globally are affected. So in a way, this crisis could be a blessing in disguise.
I hope this latest deal will help the grain to reach its right destinations from now on. Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.